We all know the truth. More connects us than separates us. But in times of crisis, the wise build bridges, while the foolish build barriers.
You raise walls, I destroy them. Let's see who prevails.
Just because something works doesn't mean that it cannot be improved.
I say we take off and nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
Allow my sword to join you in the fight against evil.
The world needs us to chase dreams.
We have to dedicate ourselves each and every single day to this fight because I can't do it alone.
You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fantasy Show. I'm Sean, and today on Signal Boost we have two special guests. We have C.S.E. Cooney, author of many short stories, some collected in Bone Swans, and a new development we're going to talk about today called Desdemona in the Deep. And our second guest is Carlos Hernandez, author of a book some of you have heard of called Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria, but his new novel, which we're going to talk about today, is Sal and Gabi Break the Universe. So welcome to the show, you two.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you so much for having us.
So I really want to dive in. So let's start with you, Claire, because that's my totally arbitrary order. I'm going to start with you first. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about Desdemona and the Deep.
So Desdemona and the Deep, I tried to make it a novella, and indeed, when I first turned it in, it was under 40,000 words, but somehow in the edits, it skipped up a little bit above 40,000. So now, instead of calling it a novella, we're calling it a very short novel. And it was published by Tor in July of this year. It takes place in a secondary world. It's fantasy, but it's their world's equivalent of our Gilded Age. So we call it the Orchid Age in that world. I call the books or the stories that take place there the Dark Breakers series. They take place around a house called Breaker House that exists in the human world, and then in one world down in the Gentry world, which is like a fairy world, the Valwoad, and another world down as well, which is the Goblin world, Bana, the Bone Kingdom. And it's one of the doorways between these worlds. And Desdemona is the daughter of a coal magnate and a social reformer, and she's a socialite, and she starts out pretty selfish, pretty shallow, but comes up against a moral quandary that she can't ignore and live with herself. So she, with all of her flaws and foibles and selfishness and shallowness, she also has a certain ferocity, and with this ferocity and this determination to right or wrong, she goes downworld, which was not even something she believed in. She thought it was all children's nursery stories and mythology, but she sort of accepts it and goes after the thing that she thinks she can right, and undergoes a transformation. Not utterly, because she's still a big weirdo at the end. She's still selfish and ferocious, but she's also found a vocation, and in that vocation, I think, will make not only her world but all three worlds slightly better for her being in them.
And for a slight spoiler, she also has 1,000 furs by the end of it too, so that counts as a transformation, I think.
Her mother tells her, "If you must go between worlds, Desdemona, dress warmly." And her mother is being a bit facetious, but Desdemona's drunk at the time and takes her mother at her word. So she goes and puts on every fur she owns, but as she undergoes this transformation down through the worlds, the furs sort of become a part of her, and she becomes a strange goblin-y creature that's many kinds of beasts at once, which suits her personality.
That's so delightful. Awesome. And then I guess we'll jump to you, Carlos. Tell us about Sal and Gabi Break the Universe.
I will. I did want to say that the full title, the short story collection, is The Assimilated Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria.
Oh, I missed a word.
Yeah, just it's the way I remember it is it can be sung to "Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego?" So it's The Assimilated Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria. So you just never have to forget it again, by remembering your childhood just in that moment for the title. But anyway, we're talking about Sal and Gabi Break the Universe. Salvador Vidon is a 7th grader going to a new school, and he is a type 1 diabetic. So the novel has an intersectional character, basically that Sal is Cuban American, but he's Cuban American by way of Connecticut by most ways. So he's being reintroduced to Miami culture at the beginning of Sal and Gabi Break the Universe, and the reception is not so great at the beginning. He has an incident with a young man named Yasmani Robles, who maybe is looking to pick a fight for reasons that are revealed later. And the way that Sal responds to this is by putting a whole raw chicken in his locker and revealing it in the most flamboyant magician kind of way. Now Sal is going to this magnet art school named Culeco for the reason to study magic and to study performance and to become a magician. But he has a little secret that he has gained the power to look into the multiverse. So basically he can look around and see many, 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 many infinite universes all around him. And he's got a knack for sort of pulling the right object or, trick out at the right moment. So basically he reaches into another universe. There's a parallel universe right on the side of Culeco where a chicken processing plant exists, and he reaches in there, pulls out a chicken, sticks it in Yasmani's locker. Chaos ensues in the most delightful way to him, until he then ends up going to the principal's office and having to try to explain how exactly that chicken manifested inside of Yasmani's locker. That kicks off a whole series of events where Gabi Real then suspects, some very strange happenings here at the school and keeps trying to get Sal to spill what exactly is going on. And the two have this sort of frenemy later friendship that develops throughout, as not only is it revealed to Gabi how Sal does this, but she is the only person that he's ever been able to find who can kind of see what he sees and can kind of do what he does. And so they establish a kind of Sith Lord, Sith apprentice relationship, much less evil, but very much in structure. The same sort of thing where, Sal starts teaching her the ways of how it's termed in the book, riding the taco. This is their meditative technique that they use in order to see into many universes. You ride the taco. And I'll just leave it at that in order to give, maybe a taste of things to come for readers.
Oh, but I urge you, Sean, to ask Carlos the story behind the name Culeco, the name of the school.
Oh, okay. Tell me the name of the school. Where did this come from, Carlos?
I am so glad you asked. Culeco is one of these bizarro words in Spanish, and many Spanishes, I even should say, that just means so many different things depending on which country you come from. So when I grew up, Culeco meant kind of rotten, and I found out from other Spanish speakers from different countries that it can, be very junkyardy and associated in that kind of way. But the way that my mom taught me the word Culeco, it has to do with basically when a hen is absolutely in love with her eggs and is just sort of like dizzy in love with the world, and so just half mad with love for the eggs that she's laid. And so, it basically is this word that is associated with kind of like rottenness, and so like the school paper is called the rotten egg, but it's also associated with sort of like this wistful, being absolutely smitten and in love. And in some other Spanishes, it can just mean that you are head over heels in love with somebody. So,
or also like a broody hen, right?
Yeah, definitely broody as well, but brood as in hunker down and love my eggs into existence, kind of.
And since Culeco is an academy for the arts, it's sort of all the students are in love with their arts and their creation. So It's a very fine, multifaceted word for the school.
Their mascot is a rotten egg, and so there's a giant egg, through which the steam vents flow. So it constantly looks like this. It's leaking a miasma of steam, whenever you look at it, and it's holding the American flag, and it has a superhero cape. And so, that gives you, in brief, sort of like a lot of the mood of Sal and Gabi Break the Universe.
So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about like the journey that you each took to publication, because your works have gone to very interesting places. Tor, right, is sort of in the last few years ramped up its well, you say short novel because it's slightly longer than what would normally be a novella, but
I'm a little chagrined, and I don't know what Tor thinks of the fact that, like, it was written to be a novella. It feels like a novella. It really is not substantial enough to be a novel. It just is just leaked over just a bit, and all of us didn't catch it. We only just found out recently, and oops. But yes, it is a novella in everything but the strictest Nebula word count requirements.
No, yeah, it's a novella. I mean, it's written as a novella. A novella has a different structure. It has a different through point, and it is a novella. Nebula does not control, what we call novellas.
We've been discussing this a lot in our house.
Oh, I see. Oh, see.
So like, Nebula, we love you, but you are not the last word in what a novella is.
Shake your fist at them.
It was
Get funny. Off my lawn, Nebula.
Tor for me is the biggest publication I've ever had, and Carlos has his Disney journey, which is an amazing journey, and I hope he will tell you all about it.
I just, I hit lotto. Basically, I hit the publishing lotto. This is actually better than lotto because my tremendous stroke of luck came with my vocation. So, I published The Assimilated Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria. So I published this, and Rick Riordan read it for no reason, really, that I have yet to know or can discern. And Rick Riordan, the man with 80 million books in print, that's not an exaggeration, that's the number, and so his extremely successful Percy Jackson series, which he's parlayed into Magnus Chase and now Trials of Apollo, just this marvelous publishing career. And so Rick decides, the way that I want to give back is I want people to tell stories in their own voices from their own myths and their own cultures and their own, tales. And so he's been seeking out many people to write about cultures that he didn't feel was appropriate for him to write about. And so Roshni Chakshi did the Arusha, and she's got a third book, and I think there's going to be even like a fourth book coming out now. We've got Jen Cervantes, who's doing Maya culture. We've got Yoon Lead, who's doing Korean mythology by way of space travel, though. So it's set in space and it's a science fiction adventure. And then there's me. And my book doesn't even feature mythology. And one of the reasons for that is because it's a little more difficult question to talk about Cuban mythology, because who exactly are you talking about? Are you talking about the Taíno? Because if you're not talking about the Taíno, then you might be talking about the Spanish who, came, invaded, and took over. And so it becomes, a difficult post-colonial question, I think, if we're going to talk about Cuban mythology, per se.
Versus religion.
Well, and exactly.
Active religion.
Yeah, and so in the Santeria practice, for instance, you have Yoruba and Ifa being represented through Christian, Catholic specifically, saints. Santa Barbara representing Shango, for instance, and so then there's a whole colonialist problem, I think, there that wasn't really the thing that I wanted to showcase. It's like let's up, give more air to colonialism or not, perhaps. So I focus much more on culture in Sal and Gabi, and to me, it's an area that's rife with possibility and its own kind of current mythology. I think what I do more is I talk about mythologies, and the way that all of these mythologies sort of like come to bear inside of Miami culture right now, and so you have how Spanish and English integrate and mix with each other, and how ghost stories are formed. And so basically what I have is sort of like people mistaking other people for ghosts in several different instances. I have, a whole conversation about brujeria and mal de ojo that happens. But most of it's pretty explainable through the multiverse. So basically, all those ghosts that you've been seeing, they're just people visiting in part or in whole from other universes. And so I figured out the whole ghost thing. You're welcome, world. It's like now we know. Supernatural? Nah, it's just basically kids who've learned to permeate the veil between universes.
And you like robots, like if instead of demigods running around, you do have a crazy cadre of robots.
Oh yeah, but I mean I wouldn't say instead of demigods. So with Rick Riordan, you have the whole demigod thing, and Arusha follows in that mold. Many of the Rick Riordan books basically feature gods interacting with their offspring as demigods. And so there are no gods that you can kind of see in Sal and Gabi, but what you can see is basically kids with superpowers doing pretty super things, They just often do them for hilarity's sake, Instead of like, I will save the world. It's more like chicken in a locker.
My journey into Tor was I was told as a young writer by my mentor, Gene Wolfe, I'd been writing, novels all of my high school career. And he sat me down and he said, you just have to start building your byline, write a lot of short stories, learn your craft. Once you have a lot of short stories, it'll be easier to find an agent and then you'll be able to sell a novel. And I listened to him and I believed him. And I was terrible at writing short stories. It took me a long time. I ended up, my collection, Bone Swans, is not so much short stories as it is novelettes and novellas, which seems to be a comfortable, happy place for me. I really love writing novels, too. They just take me a lot longer. So Bone Swans had some success. At some point, I wrote a short story for a collection Ellen Datlow was editing called Mad Hatters and March Hares, All New Tales from Lewis Carroll's Alice books, basically. And I think because we were having positive editorial, authorial interactions, she said, if you ever have a novella, you should send it to me at Tor. And she said that in passing once, and 2 years go by, and I wrote a novella called Desdemona in the Deep. But it was the kind of the third movement of stories I had already written and self-published, because at that time, all of my friends were experimenting in self-publishing. We were like, well, maybe this is the way publishing's going. And I learned from self-publishing that I don't actually want to self-publish, because to be a successful self-publisher, you really have to be a successful business person. And that is a part of the business that doesn't interest me very much. It takes a whole collaborative team that takes all kinds of organization and sort of either paying for it, which I do believe in, like paying for your art and your graphic designer, or doing it all by yourself, which I find very tedious, or like cashing in a bunch of favors, which I find stressful. So I did these first two movements, and I won't say that it's not necessarily a series in that it follows one single character through a trilogy through their arc. It's, different groups of characters take turns being limelighted. And so a character who's a main character in the first one might be a very peripherally mentioned character in the second one, and so on. So Desdemona had made some appearances, but this one is her story. And so I brought this up to Ellen, and she said, well, as long as you can make it stand alone. So I cut a bunch of stuff that would have referred to the first two movements. I tried to make it stand alone as clearly as possible, handed it in, she liked it, and she accepted it for Tor. So that was my kind of trajectory toward Tor, which had always published my mentor too, Gene. And so to have my first big publication be a Tor book means a great deal to me on an emotional level. Yeah.
It sounds like you both have kind of had a little bit of a dream come true, which is really nice to hear. So let's take a kind of a stab at talking about some of the themes in each of your works. And there are a lot of different elements we could talk about, but I kind of wanted to go off of some that I think were pretty apparent from sort of a cursory look at these works. And I was hoping we could get you to talk about them. And one that would be for Claire, just to start, which is that, this book seems to deal with sort of the issues of wealth inequality and some of the sort of political machinations of a society built on this. And there's also like some creatures in the unknown sort of thrown in. And I was curious what your inspiration for sort of exploring these themes were in Desdemona in the Deep.
Well, I feel like, what's that line? There's some kind of quote about, no matter if you're writing fantasy or history, you're always writing about the present. And I wish I could directly quote it for you and be very pithy and clever, but I can't. So what is very apparent right now, and maybe it always is in any time of human history, the great disparity between the wealthy and the poor, and a very tenuous position for the middle bit, which should maybe be the largest bit, and except it isn't right now. And I was thinking about the equivalent of our Gilded Age, right like in the 20 years or so, like post-industrial revolution, but before the crash of 1920, where just the opulence and the millionaires and people who had kind of bootstrapped themselves up or took advantage of a lot of raw resources and were ruthless and did horrible things, and also built libraries and theaters and museums at the same time. It's a complicated time, and I have complicated feelings about it. I narrated a book called Gilded Suffragists about the role of these millionaires, Newport women, in getting the vote for women. I want to say for white women, particularly, who were the first of women to have the vote in America. Anyway, I was thinking about all of these things, and I was thinking about where we are now in our world and where we were 120 years ago. And in many ways, I think we've got with like the arc of history is bending toward justice, and in many other ways, I just feel like we haven't moved at all, because it feels so fragile that all these laws we have in place now to protect workers and like equality for women and keeping children out of sweatshops, all of these laws came from lawlessness and came from slaughter. And I feel like Desdemona is a little bit like a version of America, of this privileged child who has been able for many years, for most of its adult life, her adult life, to ignore most of what has brought her to this place. And then at some point there is the thing she cannot ignore anymore. And it means unbecoming everything that has made her herself as far as she can, using everything that has made her to break herself out of that both comfort and prison, and to do as much good as she can, which isn't, after all, very much in comparison to the vast injustice that has been done. She can try to fix one thing, and even then she doesn't quite fix it all the way, but it's the beginning. And I think that's important to say.
Yeah, very much so. Did you have a particular love of goblins? But just out of curiosity, they're such an interesting...
I mean, she married me, so...
Am I particularly fond of goblins? I mean, I did grow up with Labyrinth and Legend and fire, burning higher, making music like a pyre. You know, like, I mean, that's part of me. It made me. I can't help it. But am I obsessed with goblins? I don't know. Like, for this particular story, it's interesting, right? Because, like, it's not an original thought, goblins. And in the way goblins and fairies, you see them set up the summer kingdom versus the winter kingdom. You see them as seelie and unseelie courts. You see them throughout history, you know. So I wanted to do something a little bit different with goblins versus, like, gentry, and mess with the mythology a bit. I was interested in some of, like, the Greek roots of goblins and goblin myth, like, used some of the nomenclature to name the characters. But yeah, like this, that they're the sort of the uglier side of magic. But I also wanted to, because David Bowie is the opposite of the ugly side of magic as far as his Goblin King, I just wanted to get some of that sexiness in there at the same time. Ugly, sexy, you know, mineral, chemical, the kind of the bottom of industry, what is needed for industry is raw material, and so who do you trade for that raw material? You trade with the world beneath the world beneath. You go down pretty deep. That was I wanted goblins for that purpose, so that there's a strong connection between the millionaires, the people that they are used, like standing on the backs of basically, and the materials that are building this fabulously gilded world above, and what that exchange looks like metaphorically, I guess.
You're making me think a lot that this book might be like if you took Metropolis and Dante's Inferno, kind of put them together.
Okay, I think I would ask Carlos more about that. I mean, he's the resident literature expert. Dr. Pants.
I would.
Is he a Dr. Fancy Pants?
I am.
He's a doctor.
Me too. I'm a Dr. Fancy Pants too.
Doctor High Five!
Yay!
Did you hear that? I high-fived the mic, so.
We're such dorks.
Dr. Dookie Pants and Dr. Fancy Pants.
Dr. Dookie Pants?
Look, Sean Duke.
But Dookie is not a thing you say to a host of a show.
Taking you back to middle school is where we're going.
And speaking of which, are there middle school themes in Carlos's Sal and Gabi book that you would like to ask him about, Dr. Sean?
I did want to ask him some thematics, because one of the big elements that comes up in the book is the issue of loss and young people sort of finding ways to cope and work through that. In this case, I think it's fairly clear from the earlier discussion of the book, with some silliness thrown in. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about your sort of exploration of those sort of themes and the way that young people deal with them.
Yeah, I mean, we use science fiction as metaphors for our own lives, and to me, the idea of exploring a multiverse is that ultimate what if, and it comes up hard and heavy when you are in the midst of grief, when you think, why did she have to die? Why isn't he here anymore? How would I be different if they had been able to stick around for a few more years? And so to me, growing up with Star Trek The Next Generation and things like that, and every other episode having some sort of universe, different universe, or, 24, enterprises popping into existence or whatever. We had a certain way of talking about the multiverse that didn't get down to sort of like the small people level, I think, that to me is the heart of why we do some of this writing. And to me, I'm thinking about multiverses all the time because I'm thinking about what if I could have, what if this person were still here? And so I think it's a very natural way to start exploring the idea of grief. Sal acquires his ability to look into the multiverse and see different universes because he is so bereft after the loss of his mother that he just can't abide a universe that doesn't have her in it. So he goes into other ones and search for a new mommy. And, this quickly becomes a kind of conversation where he discovers that, if you're in a different universe and different events have led, to a different sort of person being formed, you don't encounter just a clone of your mother who's waiting for you to grab her out of that universe and bring her into your own. Instead, you just keep discovering different women, basically, who are similar in some ways and very, very different in others. And so he comes to think of them, he and his family come to think of these arrivals as almost like hauntings, that basically they're almost like these spirits who come from other universes, and they bear some resemblance to Flora Maria, but only some, and sometimes very little. And oftentimes they're frightened out of their minds being abducted into another universe and confused as to what's happening, and sometimes they lash out. And so there is this kind of mythology that's born out of the way in which Sal keeps trying because he can't not try to bring his mother back, and not until he makes a different kind of choice, matures a little, thinks about things a little differently.
Is there something like about grief where we maybe don't think rationally about how we react because we're just stuck with so much emotion that the only thing we can think to do is just to release it by doing something, right? Because I think about that, like my own, having experiences like my grandmother dying, and I just remember I just played video games for 8 hours straight, which makes no sense because I had grading to do. But I was just I'm not going to work. I'm done. And I'm just I need to shut myself off from everything. That's how I dealt with it, which maybe isn't constructive, but it, whatever, it helped me. So, but everybody kind of reacts differently. And I imagine if you're younger, it's even more difficult, because you don't have 30 something years of life to kind of process different griefs at different times. So.
Yeah. And, I lost my mother last year, and, at late 40s, all those years didn't seem to help that much. What I kept thinking is, I talked to Mom every Sunday, and, every once in a while we'd even miss a Sunday and whatever. But like every time that we weren't talking, she was ontologically still there in my worldview. My worldview would constantly confirm it. And so there was this period of time when that time when we would call on Sunday evening, where it was this deep, tenebrous grieving time. But the other times in the week, I could engage in the most magical kinds of denial, where it was like, oh, I'll talk to Mom next Sunday. And it was like never believing it, of course, never fully, capitulating to that, but getting remarkably close. And it, of course that isn't healthy, but it didn't even matter. What mattered was that was how I sort of clung, onto this life and this world.
It's just human. We just have to find ways of like dealing with an incontrovertible fact that we don't want to actually fully deal with.
Yeah.
Because loss is not, there's really there's not a manual for loss. It's a thing that we all experience that I guess is part of the process of becoming more human, as we have to experience these things and realize what all of that is, and maybe to some degree appreciate things more. Or at least that's the sort of optimistic view, is that we learn to appreciate things more. Humans are also fickle and weird and react in a lot of unusual ways, right? Some people, such as in your book, maybe even try to bring back mothers from other dimensions.
Right. And so, the fact is that there is a manual now. It's called Sal and Gabi Break the Universe. And so, we actually did solve that problem. I just want to make sure that readers, and future readers,
all you have to do is ride the taco.
That's right.
Yeah, ride the taco.
Just read far enough and all will become clear.
Okay, so I got one last question, and it's a silly one, because I know we're getting on some pretty serious topics, but I wanted to ask about food, because I think I've got the rumors right for Sal and Gabi, which is I am told there's Cuban food in there. And so I was hoping you could tell me, mostly because I'm hungry and there's no Cuban food up here, and I'm mad because I don't live in Florida anymore and I can't get Cuban food here.
Oh.
But given, Claire, you got a goblin thing going on, and usually there's some food game going on, and I'm just saying.
Oh, like goblin fruit? Do you mean won't you lick my goblin fruit sort of thing? I'm afraid that's more metaphorical, and I manifest that in sexy talk, not actual.
Well, but there's a cheese plate.
There's a cheese plate, but that's in the human world. I do go off on cheeses
and champagne sprayed all over.
There's
pool
a lot
tables.
of champagne.
It's quite Gatsbyan and sexy.
Oh, there's just this blue cheese that I just talk about. Oh, and sourdough bread, blue cheese, sourdough bread, and a magnum of champagne. You taught me that word, right? It was those champagne bottles that are kind of as big as your torso. They have one of those.
Yeah.
Oh.
The magnum, or was it the Jeroboa?
I think this one was just a magnum, but it's bigger than your average bottle.
Yeah, that's the double size, but they get quite huge. I like the Jeroboa myself.
Oh, yeah. There's fruit in the Volwoad. That's the fairy world, but you can't eat it. It's like jewels. Jewels grow on trees because the Volwoad, it's really deadly. It looks really pretty, but it will coat your lungs with gold dust and you will die.
Oh, that's not good. No,
but it's pretty, so that's all right.
But sourdough and cheese plates, that's good.
Oh yeah, blue cheese. Oh, a mineral blue with that crystalline sort of yummy sparkle, and yeah, and a hard sheep cheese. I think I mentioned that one too.
And a fistful of grapes, I think.
Oh yeah, there were some grapes. Talk about your goblin fruit, but again, this is all human food. But really, Carlos has to talk to you about Cuban food because, my God. And in the new book that he's writing right now, there's empanadas, but they're not in the first book, and that's what we're talking about. So please, Carlos.
The fact is that I grew up with a sort of, chef, and, like the Cuban women that my family knew would come to eat at our house so they could eat my mom's cooking. So like it is legitimately like not just me being her son saying mom makes the best food. Like half of Miami would agree with you, because they tasted it. And so, definitely is a pan to that amazing upbringing that I had. I included, a description of her ropa vieja and, the yuca that mom would make. She was just amazing at it because she would make it both crispy and soft. And when you add these humongous dientes of garlic, and so what you would call a clove of garlic, but I like a tooth of garlic better. It's better in Spanish, that metaphor. It changes color, so it turns from that sort of like off-white color to a blue-green, there, and it looks magical. It just looks much more magical that way. And my mom's beans were unbeatable. They were literally the best beans. And so basically, I stick Cuban food into the first book a lot. And just make people hungry and also show the eating habits, like basically.
And poor Sal can't eat most of it.
Well, he can't eat a lot of it because that's also part of it, because Sal is a type 1 diabetic. And basically, if you look at a Cuban plate, there'll be a chunk of some kind of meat, and then there'll be a starch, and then there'll be another starch, and then there'll be a starch covered in beans, and then it's topped off with a starch. And then, to drink, starch.
You'll drink sugar.
You'll drink sugar water of some kind, or other. So like it's a very starchy cuisine.
Oh, I'm so hungry right now.
When I met Carlos's mom, I walked through the door and I was very hungry. I was prepared to eat all the food. So his cousin Odali gives me like a mountain of food on a paper plate, but a literal mountain, like maybe the size of me. And I ate it very fast because I was very hungry at the time. And then I was like, oh, phew, thank goodness. I was really hungry, but now I feel happy and cuddly and content. And I sort of pass his mother, who hands me another plate about the same approximate size and shape, only maybe bigger. And I was like, oh, no, I just ate. And she laughed at me. And she said, oh, no, that was your starter plate.
See, we don't mess around with this appetizer full nonsense, We're just like plate after plate after plate.
And I ate it too.
Because you're a hero.
Before we kind of full on close out, hopefully you can let us know where folks can find you, and we'll go in the opposite order of where we started. We'll start with you, Carlos. Where can folks find you and your work?
On Twitter, I'm Write Teach Play. And I'm touring a lot, and so like I'll be in Houston this weekend. I'll be traveling to the Miami Book Festival in November.
Providence,
that's right, in November, and many more locales as the second book, the sequel to Sal and Gabi Break the Universe, comes out. That's going to be coming out in May 5th, and that's Sal and Gabi Fix the Universe. Spoiler alert: they don't. They just break it some more.
I'm mostly on C.S.E. and that's where I post about projects I'm doing. I random blogorifics about weird New York, some of the music, singing, songwriting, random poems, and pictures of Carlos sometimes, books I'm reading. I really like blogging. I was a live journal girl for so long, and I miss it terribly. Facebook and Twitter, I'm on both of them. They don't really do it for me, but I really try. Twitter I'm the least good at, but I'm C.S.E. Cooney on Twitter. And on Facebook, it's /CS Cooney, I think is the after Facebook, and Instagram, C.S.E. Cooney. But people could just go read my blog and comment. That would make me the most happy. But mostly people don't.
Aww.
but the people who count do. And then sometimes my mother will read it and then text me. So that's not.
Oh, parents. They're adorable.
Yes. But I think as far as buying our books, both, I think we can get them on IndieBound or Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever you buy books.
Where books are sold.
Where books are sold. And but we have audiobooks of both of our books. Carlos has a wonderful narrator, Anthony Ray Perez. Hernadez, and I narrated my own audiobook since I'm an audiobook actor. And
nobody could do it like her, so it is worth it to hear Claire read.
And there's ebooks too. So yeah, you should just buy our books.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what people should do, and they should go online and they should buy 600 copies each of each book.
Oh, yes. And give it to all their friends.
Yes, and if you don't have 600 friends, that's okay. Random people on the street also work.
Oh, you'll make friends by giving them our books.
Well, thank you so much, Carlos and Claire, for joining the show and telling us about Sal and Gabi Break the Universe and Desdemona in the Deep. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Duke Pants.
Dr. Duke Pants.
Oh, dear.
And we're off.
And thanks, listeners, for joining us on Signal Boost. Go check out all their fantastic work on the interwebs. Go buy every version of it. Put them inside your brain. And goodbye for now. If you would like to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/SkiffyandFanty or find us on Twitter @SkiffyandFanty, our webpage SkiffyandFanty.com, or you can even send us an email at SkiffyandFanty@gmail.com. The intro music for this podcast was taken from Rock Thing by Creo. You can find out more about their music on freemusicarchive.org.